Reflections. Being Alone Together, a Community of Solitudes. Excerpts from A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey Toward an Undivided Life by Parker J. Palmer. Our disasters come from letting nothing live for itself, from the longing we have to pull everything, even friends, into ourselves, and let nothing alone. Robert Bly. If we want to create spaces that are safe for the soul, we need to understand why the soul so rarely shows up in everyday life. The poet Robert Bly offers one explanation. It is our powerful ego drive to pull everything into ourselves and let nothing live for itself. Behind that drive is our disbelief in the reality and power of the inner teacher. Convinced that people lack inner guidance and wishing to help them, we feel obliged to tell others what we think they need to know and how we think they ought to live. Countless disasters originate here, between parents and children, teachers and students, supervisors and employees, originate, that is, in presumptuous advice giving that leads the other feeling diminished and disrespected. Community, an elusive word with many shades of meaning, sometimes points to a group of people with a shared commitment to making an external impact of some sort, from changing to one another to changing the world. But a circle of trust has no such agenda. Though people's lives may be changed in such a circle, and that, in turn, may change the world a bit, the circle itself is focused on inward and invisible powers. Its singular purpose is to support the inner journey of each person in the group, to make each soul feel safe enough to show up and speak its truth, to help each person listen to his or her inner teacher. In a circle of trust, we practice the paradox of being alone together, of being present to one another as a community of solitudes. Those phrases sound like contradictions, because we think of solitude and community as either or. But solitude and community, rightly understood, go together as both and. To understand true self, which knows who we are in our inwardness and whose we are in the larger world, we need both the interior intimacy that comes with solitude and the otherness that comes with community. When we split solitude and community into an either-or, and act as if we can get along with only one or the other, we put ourselves in spiritual peril. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer warned us about this risk in his classic Life Together. Let, the person, who cannot be alone beware of community. Let, the person, who is not in community beware of being alone. Bonhoeffer's warning is based on two simple truths. We have much to learn from within, but it is easy to get lost in the labyrinth of the inner life. We have much to learn from others, but it is easy to get lost in the confusion of the crowd. So we need solitude and community simultaneously. What we learn in one mode can check and balance what we learn in the other. Together, they make us whole, like breathing in and breathing out. But exactly how solitude and community go together turns out to be trickier than breathing. When we say we are in solitude, we often bring other people with us. Think of how often our solitude is interrupted by an interior conversation with someone who is not there. When we say we are in community, we often lose track of true self. Think of how easily we can forget who we are when we get entangled in group dynamics. If we are to hold solitude and community together as a true paradox, we need to deepen our understanding of both poles. Solitude does not necessarily mean living apart from others. Rather, it means never living apart from oneself. It is not about the absence of other people. It is about being fully present to ourselves, whether or not we are with others. Community does not necessarily mean living face to face with others. Rather, it means never losing the awareness that we are connected to each other. It is not about the presence of other people. It is about being fully open to the reality of relationship, whether or not we are alone. When we understand solitude and community in these ways, we also understand what it means to create a circle of trust, a space between us that is hospitable to the soul, a community of solitudes where we can be alone together. If the idea of creating a space between us sounds exotic or bizarre, consider the fact that we do it all the time. Whenever people come together, in numbers large or small, we create different kinds of spaces to support different purposes. We know how to create spaces that invite the intellect to show up, analyzing reality, parsing logic and arguing its case. Such spaces can be found, for example, in universities. We know how to create spaces that invite the emotions into play, reacting to injury, expressing anger, and celebrating joy. They can be found in therapy groups. We know how to create spaces that invite the will to emerge, consolidating energy and effort on behalf of a shared goal. They can be found in task forces and committees. We certainly know how to create spaces that invite the ego to put in an appearance, polishing its image, protecting its turf, and demanding its rights. They can be found wherever we go. But we know very little about creating spaces that invite the soul to make itself known. Apart from the natural world, such spaces are hard to find, and we seem to place little value on preserving the soul spaces in nature. I am not suggesting that the intellect, emotions, will, and ego are irrelevant to inner work. Operating independently, these faculties will not take us where the soul wants to go. But they are all vital parts of being human, and with guidance from the soul, they can all become vital allies on the journey toward an undivided life. When the soul speaks through the intellect, we learn to think with the mind descended into the heart. When it speaks through the emotions, our feelings are more likely to nurture relationships. When it speaks through the will, our willpower can be harnessed to the common good. When it speaks through the ego, we gain a sense of self that gives us the courage to speak truth to power. Every human faculty, as it becomes more soulful, can help us negotiate the complex terrain of life on the Mobius strip. Spaces designed to welcome the soul and support the inner journey are rare, but the principles and practices that shape such spaces are neither new nor untested. Some are embedded in monastic tradition, for the monastery is the archetypal community of solitudes. Some emerged over 400 years of Quaker faith and practice. Some were revived in the transpersonal psychology movement of the mid-20th century, and some are embodied in the processes of spiritual formation that can be found at the heart of most of the world's great wisdom traditions. Formation may be the best name for what happens in a circle of trust, because the word refers historically to soul work done in community. But a quick disclaimer is in order, since formation sometimes means a process quite contrary to the one described in this video. A process in which the pressure of orthodox doctrine, sacred text, and institutional authority is applied to the misshapen soul in order to conform it to the shape dictated by some theology. This approach is rooted in the idea that we are born with souls deformed by sin, and our situation is hopeless until the authorities form us properly. But all of that is turned upside down by the principles of a circle of trust. I applaud the theologian who said that the idea of humans being born alienated from the Creator would seem an abominable concept. Here, formation flows from the belief that we are born with souls in perfect form. As time goes on, we are subject to powers of deformation, from within as well as without, that twist us into shapes, alien to the shape of the soul. But the soul never loses its original form and never stops calling us back to our birthright integrity. In a circle of trust, the powers of deformation are held at bay long enough for the soul to emerge and speak its truth. Here we are not required to conform ourselves to some external template. Instead, we are invited to conform our lives to the shape of our own souls. In a circle of trust, we can grow our selfhood like a plant, from the potential within the seed of the soul, in ground made fertile by the quality of our relationships, toward the light of our own wholeness, trusting the soul to know its own shape better than any external authority possibly can. What sort of space gives us the best chance to hear soul truth and follow it? A space defined by principles and practices that honor the soul's nature and needs. What is that nature? And what are those needs? My answer draws on the only metaphor I know that reflects the soul's essence while honoring its mystery. The soul is like a wild animal. Like a wild animal, the soul is tough, resilient, resourceful, savvy, and self-sufficient. It knows how to survive in hard places. I learned about these qualities during my bouts with depression. In that deadly darkness, the faculties I had always depended on collapsed. My intellect was useless, my emotions were dead, my will was impotent, my ego was shattered. But from time to time, deep in the thickets of my inner wilderness, I could sense the presence of something that knew how to stay alive, even when the rest of me wanted to die. That something was my tough and tenacious soul. Yet, despite its toughness, the soul is also shy. Just like a wild animal, it seeks safely in the dense underbrush, especially when other people are around. If we want to see a wild animal, we know that the last thing we should do is go crashing through the woods yelling for it to come out. But if we will walk quietly into the woods, sit patiently at the base of a tree, breathe with the earth, and fade into our surroundings, the wild creature we seek might put in an appearance. We may see it only briefly and only out of the corner of an eye, but the sight is a gift we will always treasure as an end in itself. Unfortunately, community in our culture too often means a group of people who go crashing through the woods together, scaring the soul away. In spaces ranging from congregations to classrooms, we preach and teach, assert and argue, claim and proclaim, admonish and advise, and generally behave in ways that drive everything original and wild into hiding. Under these conditions, the intellect, emotions, will, and ego may emerge, but not the soul. We scare off all the soulful things, like respectful relationships, goodwill, and hope. A circle of trust is a group of people who know how to sit quietly, in the woods, with each other and wait for the shy soul to show up. The relationships in such a group are not pushy but patient. They are not confrontational but compassionate. They are filled not with expectations and demands, but with abiding faith in the reality of the inner teacher and in each person's capacity to learn from it. The poet Rumi captures the essence of this way of being together. A circle of lovely, quiet people becomes the ring on my finger. Few of us have experienced large-scale communities that possess these qualities, but we may have had one-on-one relationships that do. By reflecting on the dynamics of these small-scale circles of trust, we can sharpen our sense of what a larger community of solitudes might look like and remind ourselves that two people who create safe space for the soul can support each other's inner journey. The people who help us grow towards true self offer unconditional love, neither judging us to be deficient nor trying to force us to change, but accepting us exactly as we are. And yet this unconditional love does not lead us to rest on our laurels. Instead, it surrounds us with a charged force field that makes us want to grow from the inside out, a force field that is safe enough to take the risks and endure the failures that growth requires. There is a one-on-one relationship that reveals, in microcosm, how we are called to relate to each other in a circle of trust. I am thinking of the experience some of us have had at the bedside of a dying person, accompanying someone who is making the most solitary journey of all. When we sit with a dying person, we gain two critical insights into what it means to be alone together. First, we realize that we must abandon the arrogance that often distorts our relationships, the arrogance of believing that we must have the answer to the other person's problem. When we sit with a dying person, we understand that what is before us is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be honored. As we find a way to stand respectfully on the edge of that mystery, we start to see that all of our relationships would be deepened if we could play the fixer role less frequently. Second, when we sit with a dying person, we realize that we must overcome the fear that often distorts our relationships, the fear that causes us to turn away when the other reveals something too vexing, painful, or ugly to bear. Death may be all of this and more, and yet we hold the dying person in our gaze, our hearts, our prayers, knowing that it would be disrespectful to avert our eyes, that the only gift we have to offer in this moment is our undivided attention. When people sit with a dying person, they know that they are doing more than taking up space in the room, but if you ask them to describe what that more is, they have a hard time finding the right words. And when the words come, they are almost always some variant on, "I was simply being present." We learn to practice presence when we sit with a dying person, to treat the space between us as sacred, to honor the soul and its destiny. Our honoring may be wordless or perhaps mediated by speech that the dying person cannot hear. Yet this honoring somehow keeps us connected as we bear witness to another's journey into the ultimate solitude. I am not privy to reports from the other side, so I do not know what having someone practicing presence means to a person who is dying. But I have a hunch that comes from my own experience. When I went into a deadly darkness that I had to walk alone, the darkness called clinical depression, I took comfort and strength from those few people who neither fled from me nor tried to save me, but were simply present to me. Their willingness to be present revealed their faith that I had the inner resources to make this treacherous trek, quietly bolstering my faltering faith that perhaps, in fact, I did. I do not know, yet, what a dying person experiences, but this I do know. I would sooner die in the company of someone practicing simple presence than I would die alone. And I know this as well. We are all dying, all the time. So why wait for the last few hours before offering each other our presence? It is a gift we can give and receive right now, in a circle of trust.